for another episode of Between Two GMs with special guest Opti from Fraggin Unicorn Games.
Hello and welcome to the Advanced Age Role-Playing Gamers podcast. I'm Nathan, I'm your host, and I've got my co-host with me tonight, Matt. Say hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Good job. And our special guest for our Between Two GMs episode is Opti of Fraggin Unicorn Games and a lot of other stuff, which we'll be talking about. I can add that in later.
Advanced Age Opti. That's who I am.
So tell us about yourself, and if you could give us a background of how you got into gaming and what it was like for you growing up gaming.
Sure. In brief, my name's Opti. That's not my real name. They called me something different growing up. They called me Chad. But now Chad's an internet thing, so I go by Opti because I'm not the internet Chad thing. So, I'm the founder of Fraggin Unicorns, the developer of Subversion, did the Neo Anarchist podcast, and a bunch of other stuff. But growing up gaming, I grew up in the early 80s and mid 80s too, but when playing role-playing games was sort of taboo in some places. So the first I got a hold of it was third grade, and my friend Michael had a copy of the Monster Manual, the original D&D Monster Manual, and was like showing people, and I was like, what is this? It was blown away, and he's like, this is D&D. We're going to start a new compagine. I promise. He said compagine. And I was like, I don't know what that is. But for the longest time, I thought the word campaign was pronounced compagine because that's what Mike in third grade said. But we started playing a game, and it lasted like 5 seconds. It didn't matter. I told my mom to get me the games, and I bought my mom bought me every single Dungeons & Dragons book. And I knew those books, particularly Monster Manual 2, Feed Folio, Legends and Lore. I devoured those and knew those better than any other piece of paper that was put in front of me. And my friends and I, we played to death. We made characters we would just, spend the night with each other. And that's all we do is make characters for games we'd never play, because when we started again, all we wanted to do is make characters again. And then I must have beat every single god in single combat in Legends and Lore, right? Like I said, that's what we did back then, right?
I also exactly what you're talking about.
Right? Because that's what you do when you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, right? Like you get these tools to let the stories in your brain come out, and that was the coolest thing ever, right? So D&D was my first thing. I had the red box, I had the blue box. I think I skipped the 2 in between and got the gold box, but also all the AD&D books. That was my jam. My second book that I ever got, because I was looking for something else, I was like, what if there's other D&D stuff? And I went to this bookstore in the mall, and they had TMNT and Other Strangeness, which was a Palladium Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book, and I got that. And of course, again, same thing. I made a billion characters, never played. My friend bought Shadowrun, which I devoured. We never got a chance to play, but I devoured that game. And then I got into high school and started playing football, and it was just not worth it was just not worth the hassle, right? To come out and be out with my D&D stuff. So my comic book and role-playing game stuff sort of went on the sly. But I did have a group that met together on Friday nights after school, and then we had to stop. This was the last time I played Dungeons and Dragons for years. We had to stop because the guy's mom said that it was the devil and, magic and gods and all that kind of stuff, which made me go like, oh, it is? Right? Like I was like, shucks, that sucks. I thought this was cool. Right? So I stopped playing D&D for a while because somebody told me it was bad. But I did keep playing like all the sort of video games I could, Dungeons & Dragons themed video games. But the one that really got me was the Shadowrun SNES and the Shadowrun on Genesis. I played those to death. Mm-hmm. I could keep going, but essentially I didn't get back into it until grad school, where I was taking a summer class, and these dudes behind me were like, blah, 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 D&D tomorrow. And I was like, D&D, what else could that possibly mean? So I turned around and I was like, are you guys talking about Dungeons and Dragons? They're like, yeah, we're going to start up a companion anyway, on Saturday. And I was like, you got room for another one? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, yes. And all of a sudden I was playing D&D again. When that D&D campaign ended, I said, hey, do you guys want to try out Shadowrun? And they were like, we don't know what that is. And I was like, trust me, it's friggin' awesome. And then I went to go look about how easy it would be to run Shadowrun, and I was like, uh-oh, what have I gotten myself into? Because I remember the first edition book that we had, and I remember this SNES game, I remember the Genesis game. But when I started looking into what it would take for me to get competent as a GM in the Shadowrun world, it was a lot more complicated than running a D&D game. There's a lot more lore, and that sort of led me to, the next part of my gaming career, which was the podcast.
Okay, so you started the podcast after graduate school, or
yeah, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Oh my gosh, it's getting getting long in the tooth. About 10 years ago, I said, like, hey guys, you want to start Shadowrun? And they were like, yeah. And I realized that, like, I couldn't just throw them in this world. I had to explain it to them, right? And I started writing down a whole bunch of stuff, and I was like, who wants to read this, right? So I made like an introduction to the world, and I recorded it, and I sent it to everybody, and it was like this in-character dude. It wasn't Opti at that point, just in-character, sort of like, and then it came to pass. And they were like, oh, this is awesome. We love this. Give us more of this. And it was all it took was just that little sort of give us more of this. It was a joke. But then I was like, well, I wonder if anybody else has done this, right? So I looked around the internet. I thought everything's a podcast, right? There's got to be a podcast about Shadowrun history, because doesn't everybody love Shadowrun history?
Right.
And so I looked around. There's nothing, and I was like, well, like, here's my moment. Like, let me record a couple of these and throw them up on the internet and see what happens. And it boom, like it just exploded, and people were like, yes, more of this, please. and so I got committed to hundreds of episodes of the Neo Hackers podcast, in character Shadowrun history. So that's where I got into that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I was telling Matt earlier, every time I would try to think about running Shadowrun, like either in person or online, we do this get together once a year with all of our old college friends, where we go to rent a cabin and drink all weekend and play games. So
that sounds awesome. Can I come?
Sure. I think it's probably September, October this year. I'll send you an invite. But yeah, so a couple times I tried running Shadowrun, and before I tried to run these games, I would go back and listen to your history, just so, because my memory is terrible. And the last time I tried to run it, I had an hour-long commute, and those little short, tiny episodes were perfect. I could get a whole bunch on the way into work and on the way back. So thank you for that. Those were invaluable for all these games that would run for like 1 or 2 sessions, and
that's it. And then, you know what? One of these days it'll sink in. One of these days you won't even need the podcast anymore.
So it was the podcast. Was that? So I have not listened to it, but was it original content that you created, or were you basically just providing sort of character voice for? Because I've never played Shadowrun except for Nathan. I own tons of the old books, read them over and over again because the lore is amazing.
Yeah,
these are written like you're like watch in a movie. You're watching this play out how characters. So was that what it was drawn from the existing lore, or were you also adding lore? Or
aside from the just sort of like story, like little story threads about the character Opti himself, everything else is drawn from Shadowrun lore. So I pictured myself doing a service to people, right, and not giving players anything that the players wouldn't know, right, and just having this as a service, right. So if you're starting up a Shadowrun campaign, you listen to this podcast and you'd be like, oh, okay, cool, I get it now. I can sort of exist in this world a little easier, and I can imagine like my character and where they fit in this world. And so like anything here in the podcast is absolutely right according to lore. And
Cool.
I became a Shadowrun writer to make sure of that.
So
Right,
now
if you're
anything
creating
you
the
say is
canon,
officially lore.
right.
So.
Yeah.
I say that tongue in cheek, but it is actually 100% true. Like I had a couple of things in the podcast that weren't quite canon, and then I was like, yeah, better than that. That's my favorite book, favorite Shadowrun book that I wrote. But I had some stuff in the podcast, and I was like, well, I have to. How am I going to get this into lore? Like, I know, I'll become a Shadowrun writer, and I'll write it into lore. And so Opti actually, well, not technically Opti, but like that character is in the Shadowrun lore. I didn't call him Opti because I didn't want to lose the rights to that character. He's called Old Crow, right? In the
Old Crow. Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Old Crow is Opti in the Shadowrun lore.
Okay, I didn't put that together.
Yeah.
Like I always associated you with the being the Shadowrun guy. So when I saw that you'd started this Fraggin Unicorn Games, I was like, oh yeah, this guy's cool. I'll buy his shit. So
thank you. That's the highest praise, right? I'll buy his shit.
Just put it on Kickstarter. He has a problem. Just put it on Kickstarter, and he will be there.
Honestly, it's easy. If I like you and you're putting out stuff that kind of vaguely interests me, then I'll go for it.
I will say this: if you like somebody, right, you don't have to like their stuff, right? The biggest gift you can give somebody that you like is to buy their stuff or to support them in what they're doing, right? So even if you'll never play a game, if you like somebody, if you're friends with somebody, even if you don't like, I don't know, if your friend makes hammers, right? If you don't need a hammer, buy your friend's goddamn hammer, right? Like, because you're friends and you want to support them. Yeah. Unless your friend makes houses, like I understand that, but still.
I mean, are you saying we should buy TTRPG material that we never play? We would never do that, right? Like, never.
Yeah, but especially like if you really believe in what they're doing, or if you're friends with them, then like that to me is a no-brainer, right? Buy that stuff all day long.
Yep.
Oh, definitely.
So thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It means a lot.
So what was the jump from podcaster to Shadowrun writer to starting up Fraggin Unicorn Games?
So the jump from the podcast to writer was pretty easy. One of my friends had recently become a freelancer for Shadowrun, and I was like, how did you do that? Like, up to that point, it hadn't even like occurred to me that somebody could do that, right? It's like, oh yeah, I guess somebody has to do that stuff. But like, I thought you had to be like part of some club, beforehand. Right. Like you had to have your TTRPG fiction writer card or whatever. And I was like, how did you do that? I'm like, I put together this portfolio and blah, 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 and I can get you an introduction. And I was like, cool. So at Origins that year, this was, 2015 or 16 or so, I got an introduction to Jason Hardy, who is the Shadowrun Online developer, gave him my pitch, and he looked at that, as a paper, portfolio type thing. And he looked at that and says, I'm not going to read that. Email it to me, and maybe I'll look at it in a couple of weeks. And I was like, cool. And as much as that felt like rejection, I was like, all right, I'll just do that.
Just give me the timeline. How long had you been doing the podcast at that point?
2 or 3 years at that point. Yeah. So he knew who I was.
Right?
Oh, yeah, he did. He did know who I was. He was very friendly.
That's okay.
But yeah, and so I wasn't like taking it. My brain was telling me like, oh man, shut down. What a bish. And then, but my head was like, maybe not. Like maybe just like take him at his word. And Jason's a really cool guy. He's a stand-up
Pump
guy.
the brakes.
So I ended up emailing him over and over and over, and he finally got back to me. He's like, yeah, you're on. My first Shadowrun project was the 5th edition Seattle box set, and I got to write the part about Redmond for the Seattle box set, which is still my favorite little area of Shadowrun. But then I ended up writing a lot for Shadowrun. I ended up like being one of the go-to people to write stuff near the end of 5th edition. I guess I could talk about the things that were disappointing, because like if I'm going to talk about why I started doing Fraggin Unicorns, like there is some frustration, right? But
if you want to share that,
it's not that I don't want to share it. It's that, like some of my friends are still in those areas, and Jason Hardy is still one of my friends, and I don't actually blame any of those people for my frustration, right? It's just sometimes companies, just go in a different direction than you want to go in, or do things in a way that you don't necessarily want. And so I say that to say that Catalyst wasn't particularly bad to me in any particular way, and they weren't immoral, while I was working with them in any way. It's just their way of doing things, and the way that I sort of wanted to do things was sort of rubbing up against each other. But at that same time, and this is sort of a couple things happening all at once. For a while, Catalyst, who produces Shadowrun, had been talking about doing a Shadowrun miniatures game. They talked about Sprawlgangers releasing, I think in 2012 was when they started doing the hype for it. And I was excited. I quit Warhammer to start playing this Shadowrun game that never materialized. And I was like a little sour about it. So every time we'd have these big freelancer meetings, I would be like, hey, what about that game? And I would be like, oh, well, maybe so, maybe next year. And I kept getting that. And after a while, it sort of became clear that they weren't actually going to do it. And so I said, I asked myself, what's to stop me from doing this? Is there any barriers? Like, could I do this? And once I started checking off the barriers, I was like, no, there's nothing stopping me from doing this myself. If I would have known then what it would take to produce a minis game and to kickstart and to do all that, I would have done that. Like that was a really difficult process, and it took years off of my life. All this gray here did not exist when Fraggin Unicorns started. But we decided to do that because, and here's why we started a company. The reason we started the Gangs of the Undercity, that minis game that we started with, that's the reason, because I wanted this minis game, and it became clear that Catalyst wasn't going to do it probably. But the reason we started our own company was because it was around 2018, 2019. It seemed like every time you opened up Twitter or other social medias, you're hearing something awful about somebody who is a personality in the TTRPG space. They're just doing awful things, like being awful, sexually harassing people, stealing from people, not paying people, and this hobby that gave me such life and gave me such a community. There's these people out there just being absolute jerkwads, right? And what am I going to do about it? Am I going to just stick my head down and keep freelancing because I'm going to change the industry from within? No, I'm not. And that's just not who I am, right? So I decided let's do it. What if we were a company that was the company that we wanted to be, right? What if we were, sort of a mutual aid company? What if we were a sort of company that treated everybody equally? What if we were a company that paid everybody good wages and on time, and didn't take advantage of people and gave them, royalties if they wanted to, and didn't sexually harass people and treated women and minorities and LGBTQ folk with kindness? And what if we just did everything that we wanted somebody to do in this space? And then, what if we were just cool to everybody? And that was sort of the way it kicked off. Is we just were the people that we wanted to be. That's why we're doing it.
That's really awesome, and I could definitely see that frustration because, really, I'm so cynical at this point, and every time I see, it seems just a bit I don't know if it's every month, but just frequently that there's people that are in this community. Until the past a few years, I've only played with Matt and our other friends. It's been my community has been 15 people. So, sure. but doing the podcast and everything is really kind of grown. I keep posting this Sonic Youth song every time one of these things happens. It's kill your idols or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's you just can't put so much energy into these people that you're fan worshiping, even though I'm a little fan worshiping myself, but you can't be surprised that these people are going to turn around and do something awful, that they have skeletons in their closet, or they're bad actors. It's just like it can't surprise you anymore when this stuff happens, and so it's better to put the energy into the people that you know and trust, and these people that are vaguely somewhere in the community, and they're have all this power and authority. They're not any different than you. Everybody's flawed in some ways, and if they appear that they're not flawed, then they're just better at hiding it.
And they're better at hiding it. Yeah.
So
I should make a new T-shirt. Kill Opti. Right? Let's see the new T-shirt. Kill Opti. Hey, you like Opti? Kill that guy. If you meet the Buddha on the side of the road, kill him. Wasn't that the
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Every time I hopped on Twitter, it was like you see somebody that you like trending, and you're like, oh man, did they die? Did they touch somebody, or did they say the N-word? Right? Those are the three things that go through my mind, and and unfortunately, it was the latter two for like the longest time. Every time somebody popped up, I was like, ugh. So yeah, we may not be the biggest, company. We're not going to produce the most. We're not going to produce the best. I know that, but we can be really cool, and we can be absolutely the best people to other people and make them feel good about themselves. And if we put any of that energy out into the world, that's what I personally consider to be a success for Fraggin Unicorns.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like modeling what you'd want at the table.
Yep.
As a company, right?
Yep.
You'd want your gaming table to be, safe, inclusive.
That's right.
Everyone can come and play. Why would you run a company differently? Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, if I can't wait around for the companies who are making the best games to start doing this, like, okay, fine. Maybe I'm not making the best games, but at least I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this right. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't all get it right all the time, but you can try. So.
Yeah, we've had things that did not necessarily go. I'll say everybody on the team tries their best, but even we have messed up. Like the other day, I posted something on Twitter, and it was like just a word that I'm not going to repeat it. It was a word that I had heard growing up. It was like something funny. It sounded funny, a phrase, and I said, "Oh, blah blah blah." This phrase, and then something struck me. Like I was like, I just put that on Twitter. Let me just check to see if that phrase is problematic somehow. And sure enough, it was like a slur about gay people. And I was like, oh my God, I just posted a gay slur on Twitter. So like I took it down real quick and immediately was like, hey, I just did this. It was totally on accident. I looked it up. I was wrong. Like, holy crap. And I think that's like that's the best I could have done, but still, we're not perfect. We get things wrong all the time.
Nathan's my handler. And it's not because I'm out to say things bad. It's just I don't really keep up with a lot of. I am in many ways a stereotype of myself, right? Like I just don't keep up with all the things.
Sure, you can.
And I have. Yeah. There's been a couple times where Nathan has sent me a note like, "Hey, you need to take that down," because same thing. I don't mean anything, but sometimes it's like. You say something, he's like, "Hey, you might want to look at that." Or whatever.
That could be misconstrued.
Yeah, right.
He's Matt's he's the prototypical D&D nerd and just incredibly socially awkward,
which is fine, right? Like, so I've discovered like there's two kinds of people, right? Especially as we get older, right? There's the people who like get mad when they have to like look interestingly about their own behavior, or these people who are curious, right? Like, oh. Like that's a thing. Like, why is that? Why is that like bad? Like, why shouldn't I say that? Right. And they're not trying to be like rude. They just, if they understand it, like it's really easy to change their behavior around that kind of stuff. Right. So like as somebody who is autistic, that I found out I was autistic later in life, which was really cool to look back and start putting those pieces together. Right. Ooh, what a twist. Right. But it explains a lot in my life. But I've masked enough in my life. I've created rules in my head enough to do social interaction that this is just one more rule, right? And I'm always curious to learn what the rules are. right? So this is just something that I can do. Something that comes naturally to me is to be curious about things and to make new rules and to do that kind of stuff. So it's just not that hard, right? Like if somebody goes, if nothing else, when somebody says, "Hey, I don't like that. That doesn't make me feel good," like all you have to do is just stop it. like all you have to do is just not be a dick.
It costs you nothing,
right?
It
right
costs
to be
you
nice,
nothing.
yeah.
I
So-
remember one time I used to say the word. No, I'm not going to say it. It's the R word for handicap. Right? So
I'm with you. My daughter got me
right.
to stop.
Right. So I used to say this.
It's my wife. She used to work in one of those special homes where she treated and took care of them. Yeah. That was when we got together, that was all stamped out.
Yeah. I used to say this all the time, right? Until my 18th birthday, right? This is a long time ago. But like, I remember I was out. There's do we still have Sizzlers? Right? Do Sizzlers still exist?
I don't know.
They should.
Anyway, right? Steak, seafood, salad, Sizzler. Anyway, we used to go to Sizzler all the time. And I remember I was sitting, it was like 18th birthday. I think it was at my 18th birthday. And I'm sitting next to it and I was like, blah, 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 blah. And I said it real loud, like, "You're such a blank," right? R word. And like everybody sort of like didn't laugh and like they all like their faces went really like I was like, and I was like, and I could turn around and there's like a whole family of handicapped folks like in the booth behind me. And I was like, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be that person that like, you know what I mean? Like that just transformed everything. Like I never thought about it that way. Right. It just didn't occur to me. I was 18 and I'd been saying this kind of stuff in my whole life, never wanting to hurt people. But then there it was, right? All it took was my words hurting somebody right there in front of them. And I thought like I ruined their whole night. Right? Like that sucks. That's not who I want to be. So after that, anytime somebody says, "Hey, I don't like when you say this about me or my group of people or whatever," I'm like, "Cool." And I stop. Right? Like, it's just that simple. Like, cool, no problem. I choose a different word. I find something else. It's just not that hard to treat people with dignity and ultimately to love people, right? It's the loving thing to do to listen when people say, "I don't like that. It hurts." This is not about Subversion or Misfit Youth or the Neo Anarchist podcast. But like folks, just stop being a dick. Right?
Just so you know, this is not the first interview that has not gone. we can't, well, because it's just we just tend to let the conversation go. So this is good.
That's more important than my stuff anyway, right? Just be kind. Just be kind to people. Yeah.
Well, I think people like Gen Xers sometimes get a bad rap for this kind of thing, and you look at our viewing audience, our metrics on YouTube, and it's we skew pretty old and pretty male, and I assume. I assume probably Mighty White, which is sad too. But
hey, it's okay. Everybody needs their niche. You can't expect everybody to listen to everything.
I know. But I want everyone to love us. But
you need their own.
This is the same guy who our very first episode said, "I don't care whether you listen to us or not. We're going to still keep doing it."
I know what you're going to say. They can both be true. If you don't like it, you can pound sand, which is what I said. You can pound sand. We're still going to be here doing our thing, but I want people to like it. But if you don't, go away and listen to something else that you like. So
I can't throw any stones. I will text him on our Discord and whine every time like we get an unsub. Right, because it happens. We get like the and he'll always tells me, "Hey, it's the long curve. Right? It's the long," and I'm always like, "Why?"
I had five. This is a weird Kickstarter does weird things to your head, but I had 5 people cancel their pledge yesterday, and like I was like, "Why don't they like our game? What's wrong with me as a person? I'm so bad." like who knows? Maybe they had another bill show up. Like it's like 5 people out of 700, and like I'm like, they didn't like my game. I'm a bad person. I'm so worthless. Like I don't know why that happens.
Social media and all this it does this to us. It's programming us for these little endorphin hits every time you get a like or a sub or something like that. So it's It's part of the systemic evil that we're
right. If you were in the
all-
real world, you could just not talk to me and not like my game in silence. Right. I don't have to see it in big red things saying this person unpledged. Right? Send me wondering why Matt 42 doesn't like my game.
A little message, F you, Opti.
Kill Opti. Yeah, that's going to come about 4 more times before I'm done with it.
Oh my god. I'm having a lot of fun here. So let's touch on Misspent Youth a little bit before we hop into Subversion. So how many of these books have you put out so far?
So that one is the only one we've put out. Yeah, Fall in Love Not in Line. Misspent Youth is a game that was created by Robert Bowl, who is one of the most punk rock and kind people that I've ever met. And he made a game, Misspent Youth, where you are teenagers rebelling against the adults who have messed up the world. And the way I found Rob is I was looking around. This is back 3 or 4 years ago. Geez, maybe even longer than that. When I was researching for Subversion, right? I had an idea of a mechanic in my mind, and I was like, I wonder if anybody has done anything like this. And so I searched and searched and searched, and finally, the only thing that I could find was Misspent Youth, who was doing almost the exact same thing I wanted to do. So I bought the game, and Rob, and I can't do this, but Rob, every time somebody bought the game, he would reach out and say, oh, thanks for buying the game. And I was like, responded back, and I was like, cool. And then I was working with the Shadowcasters Network back then, and am again now. We did a live, an actual play of Misspent Youth, and Rob showed up and was answering questions. It was just a really cool thing. I hit it off with him, and I told him that I was looking in this mechanic of selling out your values, to get ahead. I thought that was brilliant, right? And so you had to sort of decide, am I going to sell out or stay true to my values? And what does that cost me in the long run? Either way, I just that kind of question about your values really, really was scratching an itch for me in the RPG setting, in RPG scene. So we kept in touch, and then a couple years later, he said he was getting out of the industry. Like, it just, it was stressing him out, and he wasn't having fun anymore. He didn't want to do it. And so I said, well, what's happening with the games? He was working on another one, but anyway, Misspent Youth and this other game that he was working on. I was like, hey, what's happening with those? And he said, well, this other person's taking over this game that hasn't come out yet. But yeah, I don't know what's happening with Misspent Youth. And I said, dude, I would hate for Misspent Youth to just fall into obscurity. I love this game. It's been formative for me. So if you want it to continue, I just started this company, Fraggin Unicorns. We had Gangs of the Undercity under our belt at that point. If you want somebody to sort of carry that torch, I would be honored, to do that. And he said, hey, let me email you. And we had a conversation back and forth. And he says, yes, I think this would be great. I would love for you to take on Misspent Youth and do whatever you want with it. And he, honestly, he just dropped everything on me, dropped all the, inventory, just said, it's yours. Just like that. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So now we have Misspent Youth.
Beautiful.
And then a couple of years later, or maybe a year later, I don't remember. Time has no meaning after COVID. We decided to carry on by putting out another book in the series, which was Fall in Love Not Online, which it wasn't really an expansion. It was, we changed some of the rules. We made it streamlined. We made it, it's the same game, but it's different rules. It's almost like it's second edition almost, because we're really trying to get people who have never played narrative games, right? Traditional gamers who, don't really get why you would do narrative games, or people who have never played role-playing games at all. And so we basically just tell you what to say, right? Like, GMs, this is what you read. Just read it, right? You don't need to make up stuff. Just read this. And then, the players, okay, here's what you have to decide between this and this. And you sort of gradually get more and more freedom as you start playing. But the barrier for entry is 0. You just pick up the book and you can start running it because it just tells you exactly what to say. And we give you different, 6 different settings to choose from. So if you want to play Stompy Mechs, great. If you want to play holograms, sentient holograms, you can do that. If you want to play as, punk rock kids, if you want to play as a fantasy, so we put all these settings in there did Misspent Youth, and basically it's still about rebelling teenage rebels, against the adults that are killing the world. But yeah, I love Misspent Youth. It's absolutely formative for me in how I think about game design.
I'm gonna read it. We've been practicing some other stuff because we're trying some new things, but I'm looking forward to really diving into that.
I will say one thing: I didn't write hardly anything in that book. I wrote the safety tools that are in the back.
Okay.
Clifton Lambert, who is one of my collaborators for Fraggin Unicorns and almost everything else, and we're very good friends. He also is Mr. Johnson on the Arcology podcast. If anybody has listened to that one, he wrote most of that, and we had some other collaborators from FUG write some of the settings. But I did the layout for this one, and it was my first book that I did the layout on, and that was an interesting thing to learn. So Joshua Newman sort of did the template, but that was my first go at actually doing layout for a book. So I kind of feel that was a first for me too.
It's got a zine type feel, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That wasn't my idea, right? Like the first Misspent Youth also have that same vibe.
Okay.
But again, the work of the thing is with that book, every different page has a different layout, right? It's not just the same, right? It would normally in a book, you would just push the button and it would sort of auto-populate all the different pages because they're all the same. And this book was like, no, every single page you have to put it just and I was like, throwing me in the deep end layout right in the first book.
It looks very photocopied, different strips of
paper. It takes a lot of work to make it look shitty.
Yeah.
Well, there does seem to be a lot of the folks little games that so all the D&D games stuff, all those, there's always had great artwork in them.
Yeah,
but they were very much books, right? Yeah. And I like this trend. I'm seeing that the gaming books are taking on a very artistic flair to them.
Yeah,
more and more.
I think is the other one I can think of.
Yeah. Right. Put your theme in your design, that feeling you want in the actual pages, not just here's 200 pages of type set.
Yeah, absolutely. It really helps if you have an artist in-house. If you don't, it's hard to communicate to an artist. All right, listen, here's what you're going to do for this page and every page afterwards. They don't want that, right? They just want to get paid to do the work, which is absolutely fine. So you have to have somebody really, really passionate about what you're doing, in order to make that kind of book happen.
You mean not AI? I'm sorry, I had to say it.
So here's. Do you want my hot take?
Yeah, hot take. Give it to me.
I'm frustrated with the things we're using AI for, right? Putting artists out of business is really not what we're supposed to be using AI for. And also, because we're doing that, all of the people who are getting put out of work by AI are also very influential people, right? In all of these spaces I love. So the negativity that's being leveled against AI is now putting me in the position, this is how I personally feel, of not being able to like the cool stuff that AI could do because AI in general is now getting a bad rap, which is just so freaking lame, right? There's some cool stuff that we could probably be getting away with right now if AI wasn't just stealing jobs from starving artists. Come on, guys. You could make people's lives better, but instead you're putting all of these TTRPG artists out of work. Come on, let's do better.
Yeah.
Why don't we put a bunch of CEOs into our categories and they pump out a bunch of AI CEOs and stop paying those assholes, right? That would be a good to society. Why don't we put AIs in charge of food distribution for God's sake, right? God. Let's put the AIs to work where it's actually going to matter.
It's low hanging fruit. You hope it'll come out in the wash. And I'll digress a little bit here too. My dad used to make bows, like violin, cello, and that kind of thing. I remember when I was a little kid, we watched this show called That's Incredible.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah, That's Incredible.
So there was an episode where they had this factory making bows. And my dad was watching this, wasn't mad. he was in tears laughing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So he was in tears laughing at like how ridiculous it was. And like, he wasn't like a big name or anything, but he'd get like what I would call a substantial amount of money for every time he'd actually finish a bow, which is like few and far between. But he was an artist. He's like playing music and teaching and fixing stuff and making bows on the side. I'm looking over there because there's a couple sitting on my shelf over there.
Oh, that's cool.
Hopefully there's still a way to kind of keep the artists working and have this automation stuff.
Was he laughing because some of the bows had 6 fingers, or like what was?
I mean, it's just because the way he did it took him months.
Yeah,
like a couple months, because he would dry out the wood and bend the wood over time.
But they were superior bows, or was he laughing just because?
Exactly. Okay. So that's kind of, I'm hoping what happens with the art, where like you can look at something like a post on Twitter and say, "Oh, that's AI." You can spot it.
And actually, I feel gross about it now. Like when I see something like, I was like, "Oh, I've seen that. I've seen some variation of that image 1,400 times, and I know where it came from, and it's kind of tainted for me now."
So I'm crossing my fingers that they'll kind of wash out, that the human artists will be able to sustain themselves. But even artists, like musicians too, they don't make a lot of money. I'm a product of that. So it's not being an artist is I think it's noble, but it's not an easy road, and you're probably never gonna make much above minimum wage. So.
Yeah. So the problem comes in my estimation, that when it's applied to certain industries and not to others, right? And that is creating like the imbalance, right? So I'm fine, like AI in art could be great if you have like artists now have to use AI to compete. Okay, cool. So you have the artists who don't use AI versus the artists who do. That's like a normal progression of technology. Like you just use the new tools. But if all of a sudden you have lawyers who now can also do art, that's not cool. like let if the artists are also getting put out of business by AI, great. And I see no reason why they shouldn't.
You mean
right? Because
lawyers?
You'd be like,
I thought you said
what
artists.
was I saying?
I think you said,
sorry.
Lawyers.
Lawyers, right? Yeah. But what lawyers do is actually way more like easy to program, right? Like you just put all the laws into AI and say, "Hey, did I break the law?" Right? And then the algorithm should be able to give it to you, right? Like I feel like that's less of an art than AI is, but like the lawyers are never going to let that happen, right? Didn't I just hear about something that like an AI lawyer was kicked out, like not allowed to participate, right? Like threatened with anyway, look it up. They tried to do it
because I was saying I wait for the first person when they ask them if they need a lawyer, they want ChatGPT as their lawyer. Right? It's got everything programmed.
Why not?
But
also, right? But also, like powerful people keep those type of jobs like gated behind really expensive degrees and really expensive certificates. So, man, here we are. Right? This is the kind of games I make also too.
I would say sort of so for me, my perception on sort of the AI is that so double-edged. Like I am clearly sympathetic to folks who are artists, and there's also multiple layers in this. So our original art for our podcast was done by my sister, and it still wasn't cheap. Right.
Sure.
And then I told her I was also looking at Fiverr, and she got really mad at me. And she's like, "You're not supporting U.S. artists because now I've got to compete with someone who has a much lower cost of living to have equal, right?" Yeah. And so she was upset about that. It's like, "Oh, don't go use Fiverr." And we've actually used Fiverr, and even through there, we've commissioned a few pieces of original art for our podcast, and they were not cheap. And we don't have a what's it called, Nathan?
Patreon.
Yeah, we don't have a Patreon. This is a hobby.
We have some merch, but we don't make any money off of that.
Sure. Yeah.
So for us, it's a big chunk investment decision to get a real piece of art. Now that's great. Recently, we had a Snap thing where we're going to run a live game, and I needed a game board, tokens, all this stuff. and I was able as a person, not one, I couldn't afford to pay someone, and two, I needed it in 2 days. And all the artists we work with, they require. So there is some kind of a happy medium, at least for us. I still see us paying when we want like a nice cover for one of our stories or something.
Something
like
bespoke. Yeah.
And something specific and with only 5 fingers, right? But, because the 2 artists that we've engaged with both times completely, well, and my sister. So, but the 2 other artists we completely happy with, right? Yeah. But if you just want to jam out a token, right? You just want to put a face on something, right? And you don't want to worry about copyright, because normally what I've done all my life is I've just gone on, taken someone's art, turned it into a token, right?
Right.
But now that we're doing this, it's right. You could get in trouble. So right. I think there'll be a balance, and
we'll get there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it is. You're right. It is, and I can feel that's one of the things Nathan's had to tell. Like, don't get on there and start posting all these fun things you do, because there's such a lot of angst right now. Right.
Let it happen. Like, let whatever is going to happen, and support who you can in the meantime, because it's going to suck. But no industry is immune to, technology. That just happens.
Work. Yeah. My work is on a path in another 10 years to get rid of what I was trained to do when I got hired. They're talking about having machines do
tools. There are tools right now, right? Like you could make the Neo-Anarchist podcast, right, with an AI. Like, if you were determined enough to do it, right? You could even like do the inflection and just plug in like, hey, mix Rush Limbaugh. Like, what if Rush Limbaugh was an NPR host and also a wizard in a cyberpunk future? Like, run that through the algorithm, right? And that's like the voice, and then like run through all the Shadowrun lore, plug it into chat. Say, hey, give me a history in the words of a weird basement dwelling podcast host, and then like do it all. It could totally happen. You could totally do that. I've seen some amazing things in the last couple of weeks that they're doing. Thankfully, like, that's pretty niche. So,
So what were we talking about today?
So
we're talking about
so grieve for the little guy.
What are TTRPGs again? But this is what old people do when they get together and hang out.
Maybe we'll play the games.
Maybe I can get an AI to like invest in stocks and give me money.
You say it. They already exist. They never sleep. And the account was crazy. The accounts that are managed by AIs for trading actually have lower overhead than humans. Yeah. So they're out there. They exist already. And they're just because they never sleep, they never eat, they never go to the bathroom. They're just, it's like that. What's that from Terminator 2 or 3? It's like, it's the
I've
great
done twice sitting here, but
you want to hear something wild? Since we're still not talking about TTRPGs, the first completely automated McDonald's opened up in my town.
Oh my gosh!
Like, you do not interact with a single person at all the entire time. Drive through, just get your burger, and not a single person is making it or talking about it or taking your money. It is wild.
That is, that's a whole nother podcast.
Does your town have universal basic income also?
No, my town is Fort Worth, and they put the goddamn place in the middle of one of the poorest areas in Fort Worth, as if people didn't need those jobs. It actually makes me quite angry. The irony makes me kind of irritated.
It's going to be a huge problem, right? Yep. Who's going to deliver pizza, right? Who's going to drive? Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, right?
Makes me angry, right? Like, the people that do these jobs are the people that need those jobs the most, and we're like, no, you don't get a job anymore. Yeah. So universal basic income, or you create an entire like social cast of Morlocks who don't, what do you do? Like, there's no place for you in society. So like that, I hate that. It's the worst.
Just go support a Whataburger then, right? Just go straight to the Whataburger.
I hate Whataburger.
I'm
going to get more hate for that comment than anything else I said.
I'd like to say that my fond memories of Whataburger are based on rational thought, but I've never been there before midnight, so I'm not sure if my memories are skewed.
I wasn't raised in Texas. I actually was raised in California, and so In-N-Out is my... Like, I irrationally like In-N-Out. I don't know if it's good or not, but I salivate saying it out loud. So yeah,
So
Whataburger
Matt's
is
near
garbage.
the first Five Guys. So we're on
Five
the
Guys
East
is
Coast.
great.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
So
Five Guys is
that's
great.
when we first moved. When I first moved here,
Five
my wife and I were
AIs.
dating. She took me to Five Guys, and it was just that was the place. And now you can't like swing a cat and not see a Five Guys somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to go into DC in Georgetown, and I used to go to this bar on one of the corners, and apparently that they had hamburgers there too. I didn't realize they had hamburgers there, but that was, I think, the second Five Guys. It was, and I had no idea what the name of the place was. It was a place. It was just a bar on the corner in Georgetown. So, but anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're food podcast.
AI, social justice. I think we.
Well,
Ironically, I tried Five Guys because of AI, because there was that auto-tune song about the Five Guys review. And,
I have not heard that.
You haven't heard? Oh my God!
No,
really?
Okay. Auto-tune, Five Guys.
It's Dayum drops. DAYUM drops Five Guys review auto-tune. Like, Google that. It'll blow your mind. It's amazing. And you'll want to eat Five Guys, and that song will get stuck in your head. If you haven't heard this, it's auto-tuned song. It's amazing. I kind of want to pause the interview while you watch it.
Oh my! Is it this?
Oh my goodness! Oh my damn! Yes, that's it. Honestly, I don't mind. Go ahead. You'll love it. Both of them are perfect. Yeah. All right, Nathan.
Oh gosh! All right.
Get back to the interview.
Woo. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. So let's. I'm going to talk about Subversion, but I'm going to start it off. I'm going to start it off with kind of the low hanging fruit here, which is Shadowrun.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that there are some resemblances.
Sure.
But it looks like you really kind of, one of the things you did is, looks like you put it on its head, where instead of technology being kind of the constant, growing technology is kind of the new kid on the block now, where magic has been the constant.
Right. So, yes, to address the elephant in the room, Shadowrun had been.
I'm sitting right here.
You're right. Come on. We're self lovers in this room.
Yes.
So I don't know how to answer this like in a big way, but I'll say I've had to answer this question. Isn't this just Shadowrun? Right? Like literally once a day for 2 months.
I can tell it's definitely not, but there are some.
Well, what I'm going to say is like the reason that people say that, and not like people don't go to like the One Ring RPG and say, "Isn't this just D&D?" Right? Why wouldn't you ask that? Right? Like D&D, people don't go to D&D and go like, "Isn't this just Tolkien?" Right? Like when the answer is yes, like 100%. First edition was basically like, how do I make Tolkien into some kind of game? But like the reason that I get this about Shadowrun is because for 30 years, Shadowrun has been the only game in that genre, right? Yeah. So yes, somebody had to cyberpunk fantasy is Shadowrun. That's all there was. Mm-hmm. So if you are the kind of person who wants to be snarky online and say, "Isn't this just Shadowrun?" Like, sure, if only one game or thing can exist in the genre, I guess that's true. But if you allow that multiple things can exist in a genre, even one as sort of focused, I guess, as cyberpunk fantasy, then there's actually not much of a overlap between Shadowrun and Subversion. Because in Shadowrun, like what you're doing, the cycle of play is you and your team are mercenaries, and you get you take a job for a shadowy Mr. Johnson character who has usually very bad motives because he works for a corporation, and you end up doing corporate work on behalf of a shady person for their own personal benefit, just so that you can sort of survive, right? And you usually do a murder or a kidnap or some other sort of nefarious thing. And then you get money and you upgrade your cyber arm, or you upgrade your magic, or you upgrade your guns, which allow you to do your mercenary criminal stuff better. That is not at all like the game of Subversion. In Subversion, you are a representative of a community. You are an envoy who does direct action to save and benefit the people around you, the people closest to you, the people who put you in that position. And so everything that you're doing has to live up not only to the values that you have, which, by the way, in Shadowrun, like, values, what is that, right? Like, and that's not a criticism. It's just that's not what the game is. But in Subversion, like, your values are important, your teammates' values are important, your community's values are important, and how you manage those while still trying to benefit everybody and do what you're supposed to be doing is the sort of main loop in Subversion. And along the way, you also have to deal with, when I do something that's not quite in alignment with my values, what does that mean? And also, like, what does it mean when somebody points a gun in my face? Like, am I supposed to just get over that? Is that a normal part of life? Like, in Shadowrun, you don't ask these questions. In Subversion, you're asking these questions all the time. The dice mechanic is different. Like, everything is different other than the genre, right? So, but to get to your point, if we're going to have fantasy and cyberpunk in the same world, Shadowrun has already done that. You know, magic comes back into the world, right? So we didn't want to just copy that either, right? So what's the alternative? If magic isn't coming back into the world, what if, we wondered, magic has always been around? And what if technology came in later? What would that dynamic be like, right? So in our world, magic is sort of a stand-in and a metaphor for money and power. And so the people who have magic are the ones who became in power. They're the ones who sort of control everything. But now technology is coming onto the scene, or has been for a while, right? Because we're in a cyberpunk world, not a industrial revolution world. So it's been on the upswing. But recently, right, like, huge moves forward in technology have meant that you can do things. Normal people can do things that previously only people with magic could do. Right? You can now call people on the other side of the world. Well, previously you needed a seeing stone to do that, right? Like, so that kind of stuff. It's sort of flattening the world, and the hope is that, you know, it's going to make everybody equal. Well, what's actually happening is capitalism took over, right? And now only the people who have access to that technology and could afford to use it are being equal. So instead of now the only people with magic are the ones in control, you now have the mages, the old houses of magic. You also have the corporations, and you have the guilds, and you also have now organized crime, and all of those factions are now fighting, while the people on the bottom, the neighborhoods, and, you know, the little folk and the people who are marginalized, they're the ones who are now saying, well, what about me? And that is where the envoys of Subversion come in, right? They answer that question, what about me, by saying, if nobody else is going to take care of this problem, I'm going to do it myself. Direct action.
Yeah, it feels a lot more heroic than Shadowrun. Like Shadowrun, you're the default is you're playing a criminal
right.
of one side or another.
Yeah, and
I'm kind of wondering, and I was like not surprised when I found out that you had a hand in
that. I wrote better than bad.
Better than bad.
Yeah.
I'm looking at hooding, and I was like, well, that's like, this seems like really similar to the Envoy.
Yeah.
Concept.
One of my frustrations was that the release of that book, like right after that, they announced sixth edition, and I was like, y'all didn't even let that marinate for like 5 minutes. Like, we can't even have a Robin Hood book for 5 minutes before you're moving on. And there's been no hint of anything that I put in that book, any of the themes or even any of the like mechanics or the lore. It just got dropped, and that was kind of I was sad about that.
Well, here you are. I like the theme, so that spoke to me, and that's why I bought this with my own hard.
If you like
money.
Better Than Bad, boy, have I got a book for you. Yeah.
So talked about Neo Babylon. You talked about a little bit in your description of the game. So tell us a little bit about Neo Babylon.
So Neo Babylon is a city that is about 450 years old. The world, the calendar that we use starts when Neo Babylon was founded. So the world takes place in 450 by Neo-Babylonian reckoning. And how it got to be Neo-Babylon is a sort of larger story that takes place, in the history of the game. But essentially, if we gave it as a given that magic has always existed in this world, we had to ask ourselves at what point and what culture or civilization was the first to sort of use it on a big scale to sort of jostle things loose from, you know, our history. And we thought that for a number of reasons, right, Babylon would have been a good candidate, right? Because Babylon sort of stole from other people. They brought people into their into their city, and they brought like the smartest and the best from everybody. They stole their culture, they stole their technology, and they were good at co-opting things. And we thought, like, what if they co-opted people's magic, and what if they co-opted, you know, people's culture, and we sort of just used that and fast forwarded it, right? So Babylon, instead of falling, you know, roughly, I don't know, 600 BC and sort of going on decline, and then Alexander the Great just wiping them off the map. What if instead they used magic to stop that decline and instead had an incline? And the way that Rome and the Roman culture had an influence on Western civilization, what if Babylon instead had that sort of outsized influence on culture and civilization? We asked ourselves, what would it look like? How has religion and culture operated since the ancient world? And, you know, basically it syncretizes, right? So you have some sort of dominant religion or dominant culture, it goes into another culture that it's conquered, and those old ways don't go away. They just get sort of reskinned and brought in. So we thought Babylon would probably do that. They're like sort of into stealing things anyway. So as they go into a place, they steal their culture, they steal their magic, and all of those old things don't go away. They just get brought in. That gave us a cool way to push things forward in a way that was similar to our world, right? So now you'll see our gods, our Babylonian gods, but they have traits of the other gods that they've conquered, right? So, for example, Nabu is the Babylonian god of wisdom or knowledge, but you'll see him holding the staff of Hermes, and they've got an eye patch like Odin, right? Because when they move through these other cultures that had very strong ties to their deities, they absorbed what those deities like ultimately stood for. So there's a big syncretism that moves forward. And then fast forward to Neo-Babylon, where this huge technological city has gathered all the different, representatives from all the different nations in the world and founded this city, which grew way past what they thought it was going to be like. And now Neo-Babylon is the world's biggest and most complex megacity in the world, and that's where the action takes place.
I like that description. And I didn't really read about the gods yet, so I kind of like how you describe them, kind of borrowing.
We haven't really unpacked that in the book yet. Like there's a couple of different places that I need to make notes about, and the lore part, the sort of back of the book. All right, if you really want to dig in, like here's the stuff, right? Here's how the world operates, but I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Yeah, I really like how you're providing access to the beta as part of the Kickstarter. It's pretty cool. Sometimes you get like a quick start or something to kind of whet your appetite.
We struggled with that decision quite a bit, because again, it's what if they don't like this, right? Like because like we're doing Kickstarter because we need money, right? We need money to make this happen because we don't have any sort of capital to speak of. So if I give people this thing, they can immediately look at it and decide if they like it or not. And that's a scary thing, right? Like, what if a lot of people look at it and it's not finished yet? So what if they see the unfinished bit and they go, oh, this is garbage. I'm not backing this. But then, sort of like Misspent Youth, right? Like I have my values, and one of my values is transparency and telling the truth and like letting things be free. So right, just throw it out there. And we thought, if somebody buys the book, or somebody looks at the book and doesn't like it and they don't pledge, we actually told ourselves, that's probably good, right? Like, do we really want somebody who doesn't like our stuff to be buying it or be a part of the community, right? Yeah. And the answer is no. Like, if you don't like what we're doing, then don't buy it, right? Don't be part of it. Don't try to force it if it's not something that you're into. And that made me feel better about the whole thing. It doesn't make me feel better when somebody pledges and then doesn't pledge and then removes their pledge. It still hurts. But the feedback we've got from everybody, number one, people just saying like, wow, you've given the whole book away. like during the Kickstarter. That's pretty ballsy. Good for you. I like that. Like, that's confident energy, right? So, okay, that makes me feel good. But then people say like, oh, I love this lore. This is great. Thank you for allowing me to get into it right now, and I don't have to wait, until the Kickstarter comes in. I can start planning and playing and doing this stuff now.
Yeah.
And I love this dice mechanic. This is great. And I love the way the resolution works. And look at the layout on this. And then I get to come back and say, that's not even our final form, right? And everybody is like super like jazzed and excited about it. And the things that they don't like, they're now on our Discord saying, hey, have you thought about this? Or like, hey, I found a typo. Or hey, I was like, man, this is like, we're getting free work here. Like, I don't mean to like, like they're doing a lot of work out of joy.
Yeah.
And I didn't say, hey, go work on this book for me. They just said, hey, is there a place I can give feedback? And it's like, sure, let me create this channel. Right. And then all of a sudden, so yesterday at our normal Tuesday meeting, we just spent time going through all of those comments. And now we released a new version. Well, we haven't released it yet, but like we made a new version that's like 50 times 0.05 times better than the last version. It's important to be precise. So yeah, but we've gone through that document 100 times, right? And we still didn't catch those things that these people who had been looking at it for 5 minutes caught.
I'm looking at a typo right now, but
yeah, and the game's better for it, right? And so I'm overwhelmed at the people who are already so passionate about this, right? And it wouldn't have happened like this if we hadn't released the rules and everything like for free right off the bat. So
that's really awesome.
Yeah.
So I think probably people are going to want to know a little bit some of the more mechanical stuff.
Sure.
And for me, like I always look at character creation first, and I see that you put that towards that's chapter 3.
Yeah.
And
it's an internal conversation that happens all the time.
You can click. It's a PDF. I can click through it. It's fine. It's whatever. But you start out with creating a community, and I went through that a couple times. Well, at least with my group, I think that would probably be the most difficult part is trying to collaboratively come together and build a community.
Yeah.
An idea for community. So I think it's really cool, and I think it would do a good job of kind of tying everyone together. Common purpose, common cause, common factions, things like that. So I really liked that a lot. But I think if you could kind of walk us through that, I guess my personal question from backing this is are you going to have some examples of communities? But first, if you could walk us through what building a community looks like.
Sure. So we assume that you're going to have a session 0. We assume that you're going to be talking to some extent before you actually start playing and making characters. So right after you sort of do your session 0 or during your session 0, you would do the first thing that you would do before creating characters is making your community, and that basically involves deciding what kind of community that you're going to be, right? Are you going to be a group of nomads? Are you going to be a neighborhood? Are you going to be some sort of cell of rebels? Are you going to be an office, a small office full of people who are pushing back against their middle manager, right? Any of those things are you going to be a rock band, right? Whatever you decide to be is the first thing that you decide, the sort of theme to your group. But then you would decide what your background is, like what your community is particularly good at. It's almost like a character, right? Itself.
Yeah, it feels like a character. Yeah.
But then you would decide some of the NPCs you would sort of choose. And it doesn't need to be collaborative. Actually, like some of it is like every PC just chooses one thing, right? So collaborative, yes, but if you're not feeling collaborative, everybody just chooses one and throws them into the mix and see what happens, right? It's not you don't have to like spend a lot of dramatic time in relationships with deep thought and looking lovingly into the other eyes. You can just pick something and move on. But then you would choose the values of the community, and this is probably one of the things that matters the most. choose the things that your community itself values, right? If you grow up in this community or if you're drawn to it, what are the sort of things that you take for granted, right? Does this community value hard work? Does this community value making sure everybody eats? Does this community value making sure kids are given everything that they need, right? Like those are the kind of things, and we'll have a big list of things that you can choose from if you're not feeling particularly creative as well. Then you would choose the impulse for the community. Like, so when the community itself gets really stressed, right, when there's a lot of pressure put on the community, how does the community release that energy, right? Do they get violent, right? Do they all get drunk, right? Do they all go to the sports games? Like, what do they all gamble? Like, what's the sort of default position when things get too much in the community? And then you would choose the resources that the community has, like the things that by being a part of the community you have access to and you can benefit from as your character. And that's basically it.
So one of the things I was noting on this, and it's just a quick question. So the impulses, there's impulses for the community, but if I understand it, there's impulses for the players as well.
Yeah,
right?
That's correct. Yep. Uh-huh. And the impulses for the community work a little bit different. The impulses for the community are things that the GM can trigger if they get if certain conditions get high enough. Like they can say, you know what, this has gone on long enough. I'm gonna trigger this impulse, and so the envoys now have to respond to that impulse in real time, right? If everybody's brawling in the streets, right, like that's a problem for the community. You know, you could let it sort of play itself out, but that's probably going to cause a lot of damage, right?
Yeah.
If everybody's rioting, or if everybody, you know, if a large percentage of the people just get drunk, like what are the kids doing, right? And what are they learning from that, right? The envoys can choose to sort of ignore that and let it ride, or they can choose to get involved and sort of try to address that. And that's just GM, you know, it's just a hook, right, for the GM to use if they want to. It doesn't have to affect things. On the other side, and then we're taking a little bit of break for community, but I'll sort of circle back around. But impulses for characters are things that the characters can use to get their grit back, right? So grit is a sort of mechanic, sort of meta currency that allows you to keep going after you're sort of not, you know, supposed to, right? Like you get your health gets down so low, you're like supposed to be out of it. You're like, no, I'm gonna spend grit and I'm gonna get back in the fight, or I'm gonna push past my limits. I'm gonna use grit to sort of force the world, force fate to sort of favor me, right? So grit can do a lot of cool stuff. But once you're out of grit, you're busted, right? You're done. Your character can't go on. And so once you're sort of low on grit, it can be a pain to get grit back up. So one of the things you can do is indulge one of your impulses, right? If you indulge one of your impulses in a way that sort of inconveniences your party, right? Like it's like you're in a session and you're like, hey, I think I'm going to get drunk. It's like, that's not at all what we're doing here. What do you mean you're going to get drunk? Like we're on the way to investigate this haunting, right? And you want to stop by the bar and get drunk? That's obnoxious, right? Okay, cool. That's obnoxious. It's making everybody frustrated. Here, have 3 grit, right? Like your impulse has sort of, it's not it's a bad way for you to deal with what's going on in your life, right? And so the GM can also trigger an impulse, right? If the GM spends some of their grit, then they can sort of force a player to indulge that. Or if a player says, you know what, I hear you spending grit, I don't want to indulge my impulse, right? Player agency is important to us. I'm going to kick that back to downtime, right? So then the player has to give up one of their downtime slots in order to indulge their impulse because they sort of pushed it down when they were in session. So that's the way an impulse works in play. It gets you back your grit resource. But yes, to sort of swing back around to community, we will also have sample communities. If you just sort of want to grab one and go, that'll be easy enough to do.
Especially when I'm learning a game, I like to have something to kind of look at and say, okay, this is how you build like an interesting community, and then okay, what appeals to me and what doesn't appeal to me, and what would I change, and so I like having some reference pieces.
You'll notice that
from.
There's no pre-made characters, or maybe there is. I don't know. I didn't do the layout. But the thing is, even if there's pre-gen characters or pre-gen things in there, those are not going to be the ones that are the final, right? We have committed to making sure the book is ready to go to print before we make pre-gen characters and before we make pre-gen communities, because invariably when you try to make them along with the book, they are going to get messed up when the rules change a little bit, like if a balancing happens, and that is a headache I don't want. So making sample characters and sample communities is going to be the very last thing we do just before changing all of the page XX to whatever pages there are. Yeah,
that's totally understandable. So I think I get that now. That makes a lot of sense.
I have faith in your group to make a community. I believe in you.
We'll see. But there's a lot going on with the PC generation too. You've got different lineages: dwarven, elven, goblin, human, orc, and yedin. Yedin being the big hairy or non-hairy ones.
Yeah, yetis and Sasquatches and ogres and just big folk. Yeah.
Origins, are those kind of like nationalities, or what?
They're a bit like cultures, right? So our assumption was that Neo-Babylon is a sort of melting pot, right? If it's the biggest city on the planet, dwarfing even places like New York or Tokyo or whatever, right? It's just huge. So our assumption is like there's not a monoculture, right? You don't have just a sort of one group of people. Like in America, you have you have Spanish culture, which is pretty prevalent, right? You also have like in Texas, right? There's a kind of a strong German culture in certain places, right? We assume that would also be the case in Neo-Babylon, and that's not necessarily where you're from. That's just the culture that your family is, right? So you've got these sort of traits and lineages and the way you were raised and how you were brought up that affects you actually more than your lineage does.
That makes sense. And I see backgrounds, there's basically looks like a current or previous role you had. So
what were you doing before you became an envoy?
Yeah.
Or what skills, what sort of things, how did you get your skills? They're mostly narrative, but it sort of affects the people that you know. Yeah.
Okay.
The design seems to be very socially. I mean, you have things like relationships, right? So there's community relationships, individual relationships, debt. Right. So starting with sort of a motivator, right? To sort of push you into action.
Debt, so.
And one of the things we wanted to do with debt, right, is just not make it a sort of purely mechanical thing, right? But if you have a debt, number one, if you're a lower caste, the debt terms are worse, right? You have less access to the fortune that you get, right? And the debt terms are worse. But if you're like a higher caste, then you have access to a higher line of debt, and the debt terms are more favorable. So we're just sort of baking that in, and somebody goes like, "That's not fair," and we go, "Yep,
that's right,
exactly. Like that's not fair, right? Like so it makes you mad." Great. It should make you mad, right? Because that's how things are. Yeah, we baked in those things because that is what this game is about, right? It's about relationships. Like you cannot, if this game is about rebellion and pushing back against authority, like doing that by yourself is just suicide. Like you're just asking to be marginalized and put in a box and nobody remembers you, right? But the more people you have, the more people care about you, the more people you love, and the more different your community looks than the default sort of larger community around you, then the higher chances that things will change and change around you at least. But yeah, like there's one thing that you can also get grit back, right? Or the GM can spend grit to force. This is the weirdest thing that I think we do. Somebody asked me my favorite mechanic, and I lied. I said it was something else, but when I thought about this, I was like, actually, no, that's my favorite. So after a scene, right, gets done, you can gain grit, or the GM can spend grit if you talk to another player about your feelings about what just happened. So if you're going through a scene and like you encounter a ghost, and your character says, "I would like to talk to my friend here about my feelings." If you do that in character, say, "Hey, that really freaked me out. Like, I remember my mom used to talk about seeing ghosts, and it really freaked me out. It's like I'm really rattled about that." And the friend responds like, "Hey, it's going to be all right." Like, I'm giving grit to that person, right? Like that's because why? because in real life, that's how it works, right? You share your feelings with your friends and it makes you feel better. So how do we bake that into the game? And it's like, well, won't people abuse that? Like, yeah, probably. But like, what do you get? You get a bunch of role playing, right? Like, what? So like, we've done what we wanted, right? Like the mechanics benefit you if you share your feelings with your friends. And I'm like, yes, that rules.
That's cool.
Right? And if you're not willing to do that, like, all right, fine. Like, you can do that, but you're not going to get the benefit from it, right? And somebody might get mad about that. But that's the game we're making, honestly.
So what are the mechanical benefits of grit? What do you use it for in the game?
Yeah. So if you get attacked, right, and either your health or your anonymity, which is like a sort of mix of emotional and mental stress, right? If your health or anonymity gets damaged, you can spend grit on a 1-to-1 basis to basically absorb that and not take it, right? That's sort of main thing that you can do, right? So in essence, it allows you to keep going. Like if you take damage, you can say, I take grit and I just push through it, right? Or you can, like on a 1-to-1 basis, you can re-roll a dice, right? If you rolled 5 dice and you're like, oh, I don't like 3 of those, spend 3 grit and re-roll it. You can also, there's certain abilities that you have that say, hey, spend a grit and you get to do X, right? Above and beyond what you can normally do with this. It's basically that kind of stuff, right? That you can spend grits. Can you hear my dogs barking?
Oh yeah.
I thought those were yours, Nathan.
No, they're totally Nathan's dogs. man,
what a drug mine before I record.
What a garbage podcaster you are! How unprofessional. But yeah, that's basically what grit is for. And on the other side, the GM can basically do the same things, right? Like with their NPCs, they can give them re-rolls or force those conversations or force the impulses. Or if the GM gets a lot of grit, right, that's when the community impulses can get triggered. Like, hey, first, you've done enough stuff that the GM has accumulated 18 grit. The GM's going to spend it now. Like, I'm going to trade in my 18 grit, and for whatever reason, there's a riot in your community, right? So... yeah.
One of my itching, burning questions. I use that phrase a lot. It's
they have a salve for that.
Yeah, but say it's not always in TTRPG settings.
So in some cyberpunk fantasy games, the act of hacking seems to be what they call it, tacked on or a separate metagame. How are you handling hacking or breaching, I guess, in this?
Yeah, it's called breaching in our group because you're sort of breaching the firewall of the thing you're breaching, because we can't just call it hacking. That's boring.
Boring.
Yeah. So we decided long ago that one of the things we didn't like about other cyberpunk games, not just Shadowrun, but like it just seems like cyberpunk as a genre emerged from 1 or 2 books where the main character was this hacker, who did that, and it was only them. And I thought, of every game I've ever played, like, does anybody get excited about this? Like having to learn completely separate rules, completely separating from the rest of the party, while the rest of the party is sort of like, and like I can't think of any benefit to doing that. So we just said, what if we didn't do that? So the hacking basically works the exact same as every other mechanic in the game, right? You have your cyber kit, right, that you cobble together yourself that can let you do illegal things, but it's not going to feel any different than doing any other thing. It has its stats. It allows you to do cool stuff, but it should feel the exact same as anything else you want to do in the game, including combat. There is, more complexity to it than that, but at the end of the day, it's not its own mini game, and it's not separating anybody, right? You're not having to go on hour-long deep dives into things. In fact, there is no VR in our world at the moment. Like that technology has not breached the public yet. So we've committed to if a VR, right, going into a system virtually, if that's going to be something that we're going to do, and I think it will be, right, to be honest, we're going to make it so that the entire team can go in, and their the way that their head works will sort of translate into their abilities in that world, and the breacher will just sort of make that possible, right? So I don't ever really want an adventure where the team gets separated by that. It's not fun, and I don't like having the breacher or the decker or the hacker to have to learn a whole other mini game. I never understood it. I never understood why you would do that, other than you're just trying to be true to Neuromancer. And I don't think that that's the only source book, to be true to. So we got rid of it. It's not like
and that came out a little while ago. So
it's 30 years old, 40 years old now. You don't need to. That's not the only cyberpunk book anymore, guys.
Yeah.
You're allowed to dream differently.
So good answer. Good answer.
I love Neuromancer. Put the tomatoes away, right? I'm not down on Gibson, but like let's also not just repeat Gibson. Let's do what Gibson was doing for a new generation, right?
Yeah.
Enough time has passed. Yeah. Other little things. Magic. It looks like you have a few different schools. You've got arcane, sacred, and sublime. Just to touch on the differences between the three.
Yeah, so they're not schools necessarily. They are different ways. Well, yeah, no. So Arcane has a bunch of different colleges itself, right? But they're all arcane, right? They're all sort of flavored and skinned a little bit differently. But it's really sources of magic when you start talking about that. So arcane magic, the source is the ambient magic all around you, and what the mage does is sort of gather it together and form it, almost into into a sort of harmonic form, right? And then use that to cast spells, right? So I'm going to take the ambient thermal magic that is in the air around me. I'm going to form it into a bar of harmony and use that to cast my spell. And there's different colleges for that arcane stuff, so you can learn how to do that with thermal magic or light magic, or they all have their sort of counterparts with the different types of energy in our world, right? So if you want to think about like magnetic forces or nuclear forces, right, those are all different types of magic in our world. The other types of magic are sublime, which is tapping into the magic that is inside of every person. So everybody could theoretically learn how to do this, but it takes somebody teaching you, right? So you have to have a master, and it also takes a very long time, and a lot of hard work to do that. So not everybody's going to do it in the same way that not everybody's going to become a Shaolin monk or whatever, right? But you could, because it's all the magic that's inside of you that matters. And the way that comes up in game is you have sort of always on powers, right? So you just choose, like, I'm going to use this particular power, and it's going to be on and always affecting me until I change powers. And the more powerful you get, you can have more that are on all the time.
Okay.
Then you have sacred magic, which is not magic inside of you and not magic that's ambient. It's actually magic coming from somebody else that is loaning it to you, that is sort of channeling their magic through you. Whether that's in Neo Babylon, that's mostly gods, right, that are doing this, but like that's sort of the door is open for other stuff too. But essentially, that's what sacred magic is. It's magic that comes from outside of you, and essentially you can cast it right away, right? You have this connection to this higher being or this other thing, and you just sort of open yourself up to it and cast that magic. But then you're dissonant, right? You're not you for a second, and you have to sort of take a minute and re-exert your own will, re-exert your own agency before you can try that kind of stuff again. So those are the three magic, and there's different, the different gods that you can choose that represent different, cosmic ideas. The different sublime folks have different elements, right? So it wasn't intentional, but I gotta admit I don't hate it. But the sublime folks end up being a little bit like Avatar benders. Yeah, I see
earth, right? Water, air, fire.
Yeah, it wasn't intended that way, but like once we started to figure like, oh, this is a sort of martial artist that does elements. Like, oh, well, all right, let's lead into that. It's fine. Somebody says, I want to play Aang. You're like, great, you can do that.
Here you go.
Yeah. And then, like I said, the different colleges of Magic are the ones that show up in the arcade.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
I like our Magic system a lot.
Yeah,
it's very endearing. Yeah.
The way you described it's got a lot of flavor, and something I want to dive into more.
Yeah.
All the paradigms look pretty good. So it's like a huge variety of paradigms, which are, I guess I would say, kind of like your character classes.
Yeah, they're like clusters of abilities that have themes, right? But unlike D&D or whatever, like you're not stuck with one, right? You can pop into a paradigm, grab a couple of things you like from it. Like if you want to go into Brawler, I just want to punch harder, right? Sure. Yeah. Like learn how to punch harder, take that one and then move into, I also want to shoot. So I'm going to take, some from the military paradigm and then I'm also, working with a Shaolin monk or whatever. So I'm gonna become a firebender. Sure, do that. you can take it from wherever you want to and build your character however you want to. But there are benefits to going sort of straight up, right? You'll get more powerful in a particular thing if you go in one paradigm and go up.
You'll be the paradigm of
yeah.
Right.
There's no reason that you couldn't just take a few things from other paradigms if your character wants to be different. Yeah.
So I know we've talked a lot about the lore, a lot of different things, but I'm very much a mechanics person. So I'm just wondering, we actually kind of skipped over a couple of different things I thought were interesting and I wouldn't want to skip before, would be one, the dice mechanic itself.
Yeah.
And then the concept of progression tracks, which seems to be, from my read, kind of very prevalent along a lot of aspects of the game.
Yeah. So the basic way that you would handle things is progress tracks. And so I'll come back to that afterwards once I explain the dice mechanic. But the dice mechanic is, it's very elegant. And I don't know if anybody else has done it, although somebody has told me that it's similar to a game that they played like 20 years ago, but I forget what it was. But essentially, you roll a number of D6 equal to your skill in whatever you're trying to do, right? So if you're trying to, create a chemical reaction with the things you have on hand, right, like MacGyver, then you would roll science to do that. If you have a 5 rank in your science, you would roll 5 dice. If you have a 6 in science, you roll 6 dice. It's pretty straightforward. And you would roll those dice and you would keep the highest 3 and add them together. That's basically your roll. And you compare that up against a TN, just like D&D, right? So if you're attacking somebody, then you're going against their guard. If you are trying to climb a mountain faster than somebody else, then maybe that's physicality versus the other person's physicality roll. Whatever that target number is, just like in D&D, it sort of varies, but that's the basic mechanic, right? You roll number of dice equal to your rank, keep the highest 3, and compare it to a target number.
How does stats and skills balance?
Yeah, the attributes that you have go from 0 to 7, and they act as a flat modifier, right? So if you have a 4 in brawn, for example, and you're trying to push a rock, right? Roll your physicality, and then you would add your 4 right on top of that, right? So it's pretty straightforward, right?
Total. So 12 on the dice becomes like a 16 in that case. Okay.
Yep. And we thought, just make it as straightforward as possible, right? So if you have a 4, you add a 4.
Cool.
So that's the basic thing. It's a little bit more complicated than that, like in the long run, but yeah, it creates this really, really nice probability curve, right? So, and again, I'm not bagging on any other game. It is what it is, right? But it allows you to sort of do things pretty quickly. You're not having to compare your rolls up against anybody else's rolls. You are, and in D&D, right? You're not missing 1 out of every 20 times you do something, right? It's like you have the best swords master in the world, and every 20th time they stab themselves in the foot. Like that's just not. That's just weird, right? And again, not to slag it, because D&D was my life for a long time, but that just felt unsatisfying to us in some regard. So in Subversion, if you really decide to put effort into being the best in something, it's going to mean not only are you more likely to hit, you're more likely to crit, right? You're more likely to do amazingly well. And you are far less likely to not just to miss, but you're far less likely to critically miss, to do so badly that it affects other parts of your life, right? And so, yeah, we really love the way that probability curve it doesn't change the range of, you can still go from 3 to 18. Like, that's never going to change. But the amount, right, like at rank 9, the amount that you're rolling 18 is like 1 out of every 3. Like, so like, but even, right, just imagine like the best there ever was at whatever it is you're trying to do, right? Like Bruce Lee, right? He is going to kick the shit out of you, right? like every time, but like 1 out of every 3 times, he's just going to knock your ass out on the first hit. And that feels right. It feels good to us, right? And also Bruce Lee is not going to slip ever, right? Like that just felt good. But to get to 9 in something, right? Like that requires effort. That requires like, this is what I'm going to do, right? This campaign, I am going to journey from being okay at something to being the best there ever was, and that's really all I get to do. Right? And like and maybe help my community out along the way or do some other things, but like, but we also say, hey, if that's what you want to do, you should be rewarded for that, right? Every time you do that thing, you should feel like an absolute badass. And so we've created that, right? If you put the points into it, yeah, you will.
Because I'm assuming that's a trade-off, right? Because those are points that they're not. They've chosen to specialize, instead of sort of be a jack of all trades.
Absolutely, yep, absolutely. So yeah, we sort of love it, and the way that this all sort of shakes itself out is if you hit the target number, then you will make progress. If you're in combat, progress is damage. That's sort of how it works itself out. If you're doing something else, like
picking
whatever,
a lock
picking a lock or hacking something, right? The difficulty of that is one thing, right? So the GM would set the target numbers, but also like if it's something that has a time limit, or if it's some reason that it would take longer, or if somehow not doing it soon, or if you have a I don't know, whatever. If you miss, like there's a consequence, right? The GM might say you have to make a certain amount of progress on this, or else you fail, or you won't get to do it unless you make this progress. So if I say the target number is 15, and you have to make 20 progress, you might breach the thing, you might get success, but that's only 5 success. So you have to get that much, 4 times while your party is fighting, right? In order to get what you want done. The cool thing is that if you beat the target number by 5 or more, that's a dynamic success. So you do double the amount of progress you would normally do. If you crit on something, which is rolling 3 6s on your kept dice, then you would do triple damage, right? Which means you do triple the amount of progress or damage that you normally would do. So a really, really good person can hack something in a third of the time, or at least, half the time as somebody who's not that good at it.
Okay.
Cool.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And progress tracks are basically like everything, right? Like anything you want to do, it's either a single roll or a progress track. And so everything in the game uses the same mechanic.
Well, and that's an elegance to it. So that you can, from hacking to combat to social combat, it's all the same kind of mechanic. You're not using different systems, different mini games. So that's actually pretty. And
if the players want to throw a curveball, like if they get into a fight and somebody says, "Hey, I want to try to talk these guys down," like you can absolutely do that, right? The GM just creates another progress track to talk them down. Or if you're trying to intimidate somebody, right, then maybe the GM says, the damage you've already done to them, right? You've already beat them up a little bit. Maybe I don't need to create another separate track. Maybe like I'll just say, if you can do as much damage as the health they have left, right? The GM has a lot of freedom to do that, right? To just sort of create progress tracks that make sense to them in the time. Like there's going to be guidance, right? And the GM won't have to do that. But if the GM gets thrown a curveball on the fly, all they have to do is just add a progress track with a TM and let their players loose.
I think I've learned a lot about a lot of things tonight. This game looks really cool. You've already beat your goal, and I hope that you even have more success? How much? Probably take me a couple days to edit this, but how much? When does the campaign end?
The campaign ends March 22nd.
Okay, so lots of time to back it. There's a lot of good art in here. Do you want to give a shout out to any of your artists that worked on this?
Yes, the cover art and the art of the gods was Marco Gonzalez, who is amazing. And one of the stretch goals was to create extra art for the book. So I'll definitely be reaching out to Marco to do some more of that. We also have an artist named Willow Bell, who's one of our recent hires, and she's doing amazing stuff. She's drawing art of the different lineages and cultures. There's other folks that I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry. No, I wasn't expecting that question.
I threw a curveball at you there, but it was pretty.
And it's not because they're not important or awesome. I just they're like not on the top of my head right now.
Are there any stretch goals that are yet to be unlocked?
So yes, we have at the $50,000 level, which is I think less than 7,000 away. We have a fiction anthology that we're going to make. So we're going to make a whole book of fiction with different authors doing vignette stories in the world of Neo Babylon. At 60,000, we are making a map of Neo Babylon, the city itself, and we'll allow that to be purchased as an add-on. But everybody will get it as a PDF. At 75, we have a third adventure PDF, which will be released for free. The first two stretch goals have already been met, so everybody gets the 2 adventure PDFs that we're making, everybody who backs at any level. And then at 100,000, we're making a GM screen. And GM screens are really expensive, so it always weirds me out, like when people are like, hey, if we get to 20,000, we'll make a GM screen. I'm like, what are you spending your money on? That you could, like, GM screens are expensive. How are you doing this? But yeah, we wanted to make sure that we can meet all of our goals and do all of our stuff. But yeah, we're pretty excited about that. I will say also there are a couple of hidden ones that if we get, I can't say the number because it's sort of wibbly wobbly, but internally, if we get a certain number, then we're going to do German translation for Subversion and release that into the German market. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Good for them.
They're good.
Yeah,
they're good.
Yeah, and that's because, and I should say too, like we have somebody in Germany reached out to us to ask us if that would be a possibility, and I was like, I don't know, it's kind of expensive. They're like, I really want to do this. Would you let me help you? And I was like, yes. Somebody from Hungary reached out and did the same thing. So there's definitely a thirst for it in other languages. We know what we can focus on. So if we have partners, like, great, I'd love to, work with partners, but I know my limits, and translation is certainly not in my wheelhouse.
Well, I will be sure to link the Kickstarter in the description, as well as link to the YouTube channel that you're on now.
Thank you.
Anything else you want me to throw in there while we're thinking about it?
So much stuff. Yeah. I just started the Neo-Anarchist vidcast, which is basically an in-character Shadowrun history that's on YouTube. So if you go to the Shadowcasters Network on YouTube, you can see that. But other than that, basically, if you want to go to FraggingUnicorns.com and shop for cool cyberpunk fantasy stuff, or if you want to go to Amazon and buy Neo Babylon Nights to get our first fiction anthology in the world, Neo Babylon, you can do that.
Oh, cool.
Or whatever, or not. Live your life. Right? Right? Agency and freedom. I mean, nobody's gonna bust your chops about it.
Thank you so much for spending twice as much time as I thought we were going to have with you. So this is really cool.
This has been a theme. Yeah.
It's so nice to meet you. Like I spent a lot of time listening to your voice on the podcast, so it's nice to meet you face to face.
No problem, Nathan. You're welcome. Enjoy your freedom, Nathan.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Who knows when your life may end? Advanced age and all. There you go.
Thank you so much. Matt, you go listen to it. You'll understand.
Gotcha.
That's an in-character joke, Matt.
But thanks so much, and listeners, viewers, thanks for sticking around this long. If you made it this far, that's why God made the pause button. But we'll see you next time, and have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.